this woman as your lawfully wedded wife?" The pastor's voice echoed beneath the slanted wooden beams of the tiny Texas chapel. Outside, cicadas hummed beneath the heat of late afternoon. But inside, the world narrowed to a single heartbeat. Harlan Whitmore's. "I do," he answered, the words slipping out far too smoothly for a man who had no idea what exactly he was agreeing to. His jaw clenched a fraction afterward, as if the reality of what he'd just said caught up half a second too late. Yet he didn't take it back. Across from him stood Abigail Johnson, her fingers twisting around the small bouquet of baby's breath and wildflowers she'd picked herself that morning. She looked nothing like the brides he'd been paraded in front of during charity galas and investment dinners. She looked real, soft yet steady, a warm-skinned beauty with honey-brown skin and eyes so deep they seemed to hold entire storms inside them. She stared at him with cautious determination, as though reminding herself she could trust a stranger, that this was the right choice, that this was the only way. Abigail believed she was marrying Henry Miller, a broke but charming freelance model her best friend Molly had shoved in her direction after hearing the terms of her father's will. 1 year of marriage, and she'd inherit the house she'd grown up in, the only piece of family she had left after losing her parents young. 1 year of pretending, 1 year of rules, boundaries, and no messy emotions. Then they'd split the inheritance and walk away. Simple, clean, transactional. Except the man standing at the altar wasn't Henry. Henry had been dragged literally into a rideshare by a woman screaming that he was her fiancé, and before he could explain, the car sped away. Meanwhile, Harlan Whitmore, billionaire heir running from an arranged marriage with a woman he'd never wanted, had slipped into the chapel to hide for a moment, maybe catch his breath, maybe question the disaster of privilege he'd been born into. And then he heard his name, or rather, the name someone thought was his, and turned to see Abigail's eyes lock on him like he was her salvation. Harlan Whitmore. People usually said his name with $signs in their pupils. Abigail had said it with pure relief. But the relief wasn't meant for him. It was meant for Henry. He could have corrected her, should have corrected her. But as she reached out, taking his hand with such certainty, a wave of something unfamiliar washed over him, an instinct he'd never obeyed before. The instinct to choose something for himself, something wild, reckless, and unscripted, something that didn't have his grandfather's shadow looming over it. So he didn't correct her. The ceremony continued as he studied the woman who now thought he was a penniless model. She didn't recognize his face from magazines, tabloids, or Forbes spreads, and that alone made his chest tighten unexpectedly. "I do," she whispered when the pastor posed the same question to her. Her voice had the tremor of a person terrified of losing the last good piece of their world. But her chin lifted with the dignity of someone who'd been forced to rebuild herself too many times to count. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." Harlan leaned in for the briefest, softest kiss, barely a graze of lips. He meant it to be polite, respectful. Instead, heat shot through him so sharply that he nearly forgot his own name, real or otherwise. Abigail's breath hitched, but she didn't pull away. It was a second too long, a shade too intimate for two strangers. That was the moment the lie ceased to be harmless, because he didn't want to stop. They walked out of the chapel together, as husband and wife, she believing she'd secured a lifeline, he believing He'd just detonated his entire future. And yet, neither looked back. On the chapel steps, with cicadas buzzing and wind brushing through her curls, Abigail exhaled shakily. "Thank you for helping me," she murmured, eyes fixed somewhere on the ground because looking at him seemed to make her lose composure. "I know this is crazy. You're not the only one doing something crazy today," he replied, surprising himself. She blinked up at him, searching his face as if trying to understand a puzzle she didn't yet realize had missing pieces. "You really don't mind all this?" Mind it. He felt more alive in the last 20 minutes than he had in years. "No," he said quietly. "I don't mind." But her relief twisted something sharp in his chest, because she didn't know who he was. Didn't know that this marriage, simple for her, was a catastrophe for him, for her too. Once she found out. Yet he couldn't bring himself to destroy the fragile hope on her face. Not yet. As they walked toward the old pickup truck parked outside one Molly had borrowed for them, Abigail's steps faltered. She looked up at him with a seriousness that made him straighten. "There's something you should know. My sister and my ex, they're trying to steal my inheritance. The house. My father's house." Her throat bobbed. "This marriage. It's the only way to protect it." A protective surge rose in him, instinctive, primal. "Who's trying to take it from you?" She shook her head quickly. "It doesn't matter. After a year, it won't be their concern anymore." But he heard the tremor in her voice, the unspoken fear. He saw the exhaustion of a woman forced to survive people who should have loved her. He saw himself too twisted into a different shape. Yes, but trapped in obligations he'd never chosen. Two strangers, both trying to escape cages, now accidentally locked into one together. As he helped her into the truck, she hesitated once more. "Just for today," she whispered, the vulnerability slipping through. "Let me believe everything is okay. Tomorrow, we can talk business, rules, everything." He closed her door gently. "Today," he promised, "everything is okay." But inside, his pulse hammered with a truth he didn't dare speak. He wasn't sure he'd be willing to let this go in a year, or ever. The drive back to the small rental house Molly had arranged was thick with unsaid things. Abigail stared out the window, clutching the marriage license like it was both a blessing and a burden. Harlan kept his hands tight on the wheel, repeating her words in his head. "My sister, my ex, they want my house." A new conflict formed in his mind, not just the lie he was living in, but the danger she was in. He didn't need more details to know. There was darkness waiting for her at that house. He could feel it the way one senses a storm on the horizon, and the thought of anyone hurting her emotionally or physically sent something cold and lethal curling low in his gut. This wasn't just a mistaken marriage anymore. It was a collision course. He should tell her the truth. He knew that. But the moment he opened his mouth, she smiled, faintly, resting her head against the window, whispering, "I can't believe I'm finally safe." And he swallowed the confession whole. He'd protect her, even if she didn't know who he really was. Even if she eventually hated him for the lie, even if this fragile, strange hope between them shattered when the truth came out. But as the sun dipped low, bathing her in amber light. Harlan felt the first crack in the armor he'd built his entire life. She wasn't meant to be his wife. She wasn't meant to be the one standing beside him in a chapel. And yet, he'd never wanted anything so fiercely. Sometimes fate wasn't a lightning strike. Sometimes it was a mistake. A name called out to the wrong man. A kiss that lingered a heartbeat too long. A vow spoken before he understood how deeply it would bind him. And as they pulled into the driveway of their temporary home, Harlan realized the truth with startling clarity. This mistaken marriage was the most deliberate choice he'd ever made, and he had no intention of letting her go. The first day they moved into the little rental house felt strangely intimate, as if life had shoved two mismatched puzzle pieces into the same frame and insisted they now belonged together. Abigail stopped dead in the gravel driveway the moment she saw the glossy black Porsche parked under the dying light of sunset. Her eyes widened. Suspicion flickering fast. "You said you were broke." Harlan didn't miss a beat. He leaned one shoulder against the car, with a lazy confidence that only made the lie more dangerous. "A friend lent it to me," he said, offering the half-smile he'd used on board members, reporters, and entire rooms of investors. The kind of smile that worked far too well, too often. She narrowed her gaze, studying the luxurious leather, the shine, the unmistakable purr of a vehicle crafted for people like him, not the penniless model she thought he was. But she didn't press. He felt something inside him uncoil with relief and guilt. The car was his. Of course, the lie was his too. And the way she trusted him, even while doubting certain details, was becoming a weight he carried everywhere. Inside the house, everything felt cramped compared to the penthouses he was used to. The ceilings were low, the floors creaked, and the kitchen faucet whined when turned too far left. But Abigail walked through the space as if stepping into a safe haven. She placed her bag gently on the small dining table, brushed her fingers along the counter, exhaled softly. "It's not much," she murmured, "but it's ours for now." He wanted to tell her he could buy her a mansion. He wanted to confess everything: his name, his money, the storm waiting for him back in New York, the engagement he'd run from. But she looked so peaceful in that moment, so fragilely hopeful, that the words turned to ash in his throat. He chose silence instead. It wasn't noble. It was selfish. He knew that. And yet he watched her walk into the single bedroom, leaving him the sofa without hesitation. And something deep inside him twisted with a strange mix of yearning and shame. He didn't sleep much that night. The sofa springs were uncomfortable. But that wasn't why. Every time Abigail passed the living room, checking on a forgotten glass of water or searching for her scarf, the thin cotton of her sleep shirt brushing softly around her hips, the faint scent of citrus in her curls, Harlan found himself unable to look away. At one point, she leaned over the back of the sofa to adjust the blanket she'd left for him, and her fingers grazed his shoulder. Just one brush barely there. Yet his entire body reacted as if she'd struck a match to dry tinder. He forced himself to roll to the other side, jaw tense. This wasn't what he'd come here for. This wasn't part of the lie. He wasn't supposed to want her, but he did. More every hour. Abigail felt something too, he could tell. She avoided looking at him for too long, as if the sight of him unsettled her. Her pulse jumped whenever his arm flexed under his t-shirt while he stood washing dishes. She flinched when their hands brushed in the grocery store aisle. And once, when he walked past her in the narrow hallway, her breath hitched as her shoulder grazed his chest. She hid it well. But he noticed everything, not because he was observant, though he was, but because every reaction she had felt, like a map leading him somewhere he shouldn't want to go. Still, they built their fragile routine, Abigail waking early, tying her curls back with a worn silk scarf, brewing coffee strong enough to resurrect the dead, Harlan pretending not to watch her from the sofa, then pretending not to crave the life they were play-acting, both pretending this arrangement was only business, though it already felt like anything but. The tension simmered quietly until the night Molly came over with a bottle of sweet wine and a box of fried chicken. Abigail rarely drank, but tonight she took every glass Molly poured her. The laughter grew louder, the room warmer, the air thicker. By the time Molly left, Abigail's cheeks were flushed rose gold, her steps uneven, her eyes soft and unfocused. She stumbled into the living room where Harlan was reading a book he'd stopped understanding 3 chapters ago. "Hey," she whispered, leaning against the armrest. "Henry." The name stabbed him cleanly, precisely, like a blade slipped between ribs. He closed the book slowly. "Yeah." She blinked at him, pupils wide, lips parted slightly. "Your eyes." She tilted her head, studying him with the kind of raw honesty only people drunk or heartbroken dared to show. "They're really beautiful." Has anyone ever told you that? His breath caught, not because of the compliment he'd heard countless variations of it all his life, but because of the way she said it, soft, vulnerable, like she wasn't supposed to be noticing him like that, like she'd tried not to, like something inside her had slipped. He shifted, trying to force steadiness into his voice. "Abigail." But she stepped closer, her knee brushing his. The warmth of her skin seeped through his jeans and set every nerve alight. She looked up at him, eyes flicking between his mouth and his gaze, and he felt the moment he lost the fragile restraint he'd clung to all week. He leaned in without touching her, their breaths mingling in a delicate, dangerous space. "Don't look at me like that, sweetheart," he murmured, voice low, roughened by the truth he shouldn't be confessing. "Because I can't promise I'll be able to control myself if you do." Her breath stuttered. "Control yourself. From what?" His jaw tightened, desire twisting like a current under his skin. He wanted to tell her, wanted to say he'd been fighting the urge to touch her since the second she placed her hand in his at the altar. But she was drunk, unsteady, and he respected her too much for that. So instead, he forced himself to lean back, hands gripping the sofa like it was the only anchor left, keeping him sane. "From ruining this whole damn arrangement," he said, voice thick, "before it even starts." She blinked, trying to process the meaning in his tone, but the alcohol pulled her down gently, like waves closing over sand. Her head dipped slightly, and Harlan rose instantly, catching her by the waist before she could fall. She melted into his arms, soft and warm, her cheek resting against his chest. For a heartbeat, just one, he allowed himself the luxury of holding her. Her scent was intoxicating, orange blossom and something sweet he didn't have a name for. His heart hammered traitorously beneath her ear. He carried her to the bedroom, laid her gently on the bed, and pulled the blanket over her. She stirred faintly, whispering something he couldn't quite catch. Maybe his name, his real name, or maybe it was nothing. But he stood there for a long moment, watching her breathe, fighting the war inside his own chest. She wasn't his to want. Not like this. Not yet. Maybe not ever if she learned the truth. As he turned to leave the room, she shifted again, reaching out blindly. Her fingers brushed the back of his hand. "Stay," she murmured. Not awake enough to mean it, but the single word nearly destroyed him. He pulled his hand gently from her grasp and whispered, "Not tonight," then forced himself back to the sofa. Sleep never came. A new conflict settled in the house like a ghost that refused to leave. The lie wasn't just about his name anymore. It was about the growing, impossible truth. He wanted her. Wanted her laughter in the kitchen. Wanted her tiny hums when she concentrated. Wanted her soft, shy glances when she thought he wasn't looking. Wanted everything that wasn't part of the deal. And beneath it all, another fear curled deep and sharp. The empire he'd run from wouldn't let him stay hidden forever. He wasn't the only danger in Abigail's life. He'd overheard Molly before she left tonight quiet. Hurried whispers about Chloe sniffing around again. Kyle asking questions. Concerns about someone watching the Johnson house. Abigail wasn't safe. And Harlan realized with sudden clarity that playing poor wasn't just a lie. It was a luxury he couldn't afford if he wanted to protect her. Tonight, she'd almost kissed him. Tomorrow, her enemies, known or unknown, might come knocking. The contract marriage was becoming something else, something messy, fragile, real. And Harlan Whitmore, heir to an empire built on power, found himself standing at a crossroads he never expected. To keep the lie alive, or to become the man she actually needed. Abigail hadn't returned to her father's house since the funeral, not because she didn't want to, but because stepping across that threshold meant facing the ghosts of every promise he had ever made her. It also meant stepping into enemy territory. The house was large, old, ivy-wrapped, with a sentimentality too deep to measure. And of all the unfair things life had done to her, the cruelest might have been leaving that property in her name, because people only coveted what shone brightest. For Chloe and Kyle, the house wasn't a home. It was a prize, a throne, a shortcut to a life neither of them ever wanted to earn honestly. Abigail stood in the driveway now, staring at the familiar porch where she once ate popsicles on hot Texas afternoons. Harlan stood beside her, his presence a silent shield. She didn't ask him to come. He didn't ask for permission. He simply followed, and she was grateful for it in a way she wouldn't admit. "Ready?" he asked quietly. She wasn't, but she nodded. They stepped toward the front door only to freeze when they heard voices inside. Not strangers, not burglars. Voices she knew too well. Chloe's sharp, nasal disbelief, Kyle's useless muttering. Abigail felt her stomach drop. They shouldn't be here. They couldn't be here. Someone must have tipped them off about the inheritance terms, maybe an attorney, maybe a nosy neighbor, maybe their own paranoia, but they'd gotten inside. No, not just gotten inside. They'd planned this. Abigail reached instinctively for Harlan's arm, fingers trembling slightly. He covered her hand with his own, a simple gesture, but the steadiness in his grip grounded her. Stay behind me, he murmured, low enough that only she could hear. Then he pushed the door open. The foyer lights were on. Boxes were stacked everywhere. Chloe was halfway through the living room, pointing at the chandelier like a queen, surveying her kingdom. Kyle was fumbling with a ring of keys, Abigail's keys. Both jerked around at the sound of the door. For a beat, nobody breathed. Then Chloe's face twisted. You're supposed to be dead. The words were so blunt, so venomously honest, that Abigail's breath caught. She hadn't expected Chloe to pretend innocence. Chloe never pretended. But hearing the murderous truth, laid out so casually, still felt like being slapped. Kyle stepped forward, paling. Abigail, it's not what it looks like. It looks... Harlan cut in, voice cool as tempered steel. Like the two of you broke into private property. Chloe scoffed. Who the hell are you? The question wasn't what made Abigail shiver. It was the way Harlan looked at Chloe, calm, patient, but with a warning that simmered low beneath the surface. Her husband. Chloe blinked. Kyle's mouth fell open. Abigail's pulse tripped painfully. Husband. Every time he said it, it struck something sensitive inside her, something she couldn't name yet. You're lying. Chloe spat. Abigail would never marry someone like what Harlan asked softly. Abigail braced herself, because Chloe always aimed to wound someone so average. Chloe sneered. Someone broke. A nobody. Harlan smiled a slow, almost pitying smile that Abigail recognized from the few moments she'd caught him truly unguarded. But he didn't look insulted. If anything, he looked entertained. Thing is, he said, stepping forward with controlled, predatory calm, I'm not a nobody. And this house, every square inch of it, belongs to my wife. Meaning your being here is trespassing. Chloe's expression wavered. She wasn't stupid. She could sense when a man wasn't bluffing. Kyle, however, doubled down on stupidity. She was supposed to marry me, he blurted. Her dad wanted her dad. Harlan said icily, wanted the person who loved her to protect her. And you've done nothing but betray, manipulate, and try to steal from her. Kyle flinched as if the words were physical blows. Good. Abigail felt the urge to step forward, to defend herself. But Harlan shifted just slightly, shielding her with his body, not blocking her, just standing enough in front of her to bear the confrontation for her. Her throat tightened at the unfamiliar sensation, being protected. We have the keys, Chloe snapped back, though her voice trembled. This house should be ours. We were promised possessing stolen keys doesn't make you owners, Harlan said. It makes you criminals. Chloe's eyes flashed. Abigail can't even take care of herself. She shouldn't get this house. We should... Abigail stiffened, shame and fury flickering through her chest. It was the same argument Chloe had always used. Abigail was too gentle, too soft, too emotional to deserve anything. Harlan turned slightly, glancing over his shoulder as if checking whether she wanted to answer. She didn't. Not yet. She wanted to hear what he would say. And what he said was so unexpected, it shook her. She's stronger than you'll ever be. Chloe scoffed, but Harlan kept going. Calm, unshakable. Because despite everything you've done to her, she's still standing. That's what strength looks like. Not stealing, not scheming, not leeching off other people's grief. For the first time in her life, Abigail saw Chloe falter. Not by much pride always held her upright, but enough to feel like justice. And then came the moment she would replay for months to come. Harlan stepped closer, lowering his voice to a tone that was polite but so cold it made Kyle step back. You two are going to walk out that door. Right now. If you ever return without permission, I'll make sure the police hear everything attempted theft, break-in, whatever else you've tried. His gaze flicked to the open back door, where a tarp, suspiciously large, lay folded on the tile floor. Abigail's stomach churned. They really had prepared for her body. Next time. Harlan added, I won't be this civil. Chloe swallowed hard. Kyle tugged her sleeve. And like that, the two of them walked past Harlan, past Abigail, past the life they had tried to steal. Chloe shot Abigail a hateful glare on her way out, but Abigail didn't look away, not this time. She lifted her chin, holding Chloe's gaze with a steadiness she hadn't known she possessed. Chloe's expression cracked before she spun around and stormed toward the gate. When the door finally closed behind them, silence filled the house, heavy, haunted, breathless. Abigail exhaled shakily and realized her hands were trembling. She hadn't asked for rescue. She hadn't believed she deserved it, but he'd stepped in anyway. She stared at his back broad, protective, immovable, and something warm spread through her chest. Gratitude, relief, and something even more dangerous. You didn't have to do that, she whispered. He turned to her, eyes tender in a way that contradicted the ruthless man who'd just shut down her enemies. Yes, he said softly. I did. The simplicity of it hit her harder than any dramatic declaration. She blinked rapidly, suddenly unsteady. He stepped closer, watching her carefully. As if she were a piece of delicate artwork he worried he might break by touching too suddenly. Abigail, he said, voice low. You're shaking. I'm fine. But her voice betrayed her. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, a feather-light touch, reverent and grounding. You're not fine, he murmured. But you don't have to pretend with me. She swallowed hard, fighting the urge to lean into him. She didn't want to rely on someone who would leave in a year. She didn't want to want him, and yet her heart kept lunging toward him anyway. Why did you help me like that? She whispered. You don't owe me anything. A muscle ticked in his jaw. I owe you the truth, he nearly said. She felt it hovering on his tongue. She saw the conflict flicker behind his eyes, the desire to confess, and the fear of losing her if he did. But instead of the truth, he gave her something else, something equally disarming. I'm your husband, he said gently. Even if it's complicated, the world doesn't get to hurt you while I'm around. Her breath caught. That was the moment, the fragile, terrifying, pivotal moment when part of her chest cracked open for him. Harlan, she whispered before she could stop herself. His eyes softened at the sound of his real name on her lips, so intimate and unguarded. She hadn't meant to say it. She hadn't realized she was falling, and neither of them realized yet that tonight's victory had set off something larger, because Kyle and Chloe weren't done. They'd been humiliated, and humiliated people always came back hungry. Outside, as their car peeled out of the driveway, Chloe's expression twisted with something dark. "If we can't take the house," she hissed, "we'll take everything else." Kyle swallowed. "What does that mean?" Chloe's smile was cold. "We find out who her husband really is, inside the house." Abigail stood inches from Harlan, heart pounding, unaware of the storm forming just beyond her doorstep. She only knew one thing for certain. This was the first time in her life someone had stood between her and the world, not to trap her, but to shield her. And that, perhaps, was the most dangerous thing of all. The house was silent after Chloe and Kyle's retreat, but the silence didn't feel peaceful. It hummed with the echo of confrontation, the pulse of adrenaline still rushing through Abigail's veins, and the charged awareness of the man who had stood like a wall between her and the two people who'd tried to break her life apart. Harlan didn't move at first. He simply watched her, chest rising and falling with the slow, controlled breaths of someone holding back a storm. Abigail wrapped her arms around herself, partly for warmth, partly because her body didn't know what to do with all the emotions spiraling inside. Gratitude, fear, something dangerously close to longing. It confused her. She wasn't supposed to feel anything. Not for a man she barely knew. Not for a man who would leave when their contract was done. Not for a man she shouldn't trust. But when she looked up and saw him watching her, like she was something precious, something worth protecting, her chest tightened until she felt breathless. "I didn't expect you to step in like that," she murmured, eyes drifting away because his gaze felt too intimate. "You didn't have to." He took a slow step forward, almost cautious, like approaching a frightened animal he didn't want to startle. "I told you," he said softly. "I'm not going to let anyone hurt you." His voice was calm, but underneath it, there was something raw, something that made her heart twist. "It's just the contract," she whispered quickly, before the moment could shift into something she couldn't handle. "You're fulfilling your role. That's all." A faint, almost amused exhale left him somewhere between a scoff and a sigh. Abigail. Her name in his voice was always a problem. Low, warm, coated in the kind of attention she wasn't used to receiving, if you really believe that's all it is. His gaze dipped briefly to her lips before rising back to her eyes. "You haven't been paying attention." Her breath stalled. No. She didn't want this conversation. Not here. Not now. Not while her emotions were already frayed and messy. "We should focus on the inheritance," she said, retreating one step, on protecting the house, on staying under the radar, on... She froze when he slipped his jacket off and draped it over her shoulders. She hadn't even realized she was shivering. The fabric was warm. So was he. His fingers brushed the back of her neck as he adjusted the collar, and the touch felt like a spark running down her spine. "You're freezing," he murmured, leaning closer, his breath touching her cheek. "And you're shaking again." "It's been a long day," she answered stiffly, hoping the words sounded steadier than she felt. "That's all." But he wasn't convinced. She could see it. Harlan had that unsettling ability to see straight through people, past words and facades, straight into the heart of the matter. He had done it with Chloe, with Kyle, and now he was doing it with her. "I don't like other people touching you," he said suddenly. quietly, as if the confession slipped out before he could stop it. Abigail blinked. What Harlan didn't take it back. His eyes held hers with a fierce, possessive honesty that set her pulse racing. When Chloe grabbed your arm earlier, when Kyle stepped too close, his jaw tightened. I hated it. She swallowed, the weight of his admission knocking the air from her lungs. No one had ever wanted her like that. Not with that intensity. Not with that unrestrained certainty. That's not part of the deal, she whispered. Neither was wanting to punch the guy for breathing in your direction, he replied, voice rougher than before. She felt heat pool low in her stomach, confusing, warm, and almost frightening in its intensity. You don't know me enough to feel that. The corner of his mouth lifted, not mocking, soft, devastating. Sweetheart, he murmured, I know enough. She took a shaky breath, stepping back again, creating distance she desperately needed. We're contract married. And this isn't real. He tilted his head, studying her like she had just presented an equation that made no sense. Marriage is a contract, he said, tone quiet but unwavering. All of them. She shook her head. Not like this. Every real marriage. He continued, moving closer again, starts with an agreement, a promise, a risk. Two people choosing each other despite everything. We didn't choose each other, she whispered. You were a mix-up. Maybe, he said, voice dropping into something deeper. But I'm still here. She looked away. We're roommates. We're married. Temporarily. Still married. Stop doing that. Doing what he asked, though he absolutely knew. Making this sound like something it isn't. His expression softened, not with pity, but with understanding. Like he could sense the fear she was trying so hard to hide. Abigail, he said, taking her chin gently between his fingers, lifting her gaze to his. I'm not trying to rush you. I'm not asking for something you don't want. But don't pretend there's nothing here. Not after tonight. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She wanted to deny it, wanted to lie, wanted to insist it was all adrenaline and gratitude and misunderstanding. But the truth buzzed under her skin, alive, insistent. There was something. She felt it every time he looked at her like this, every time he stepped between her and danger, every time his voice softened around her name, and that terrified her. Harlan, she breathed, voice thin. I can't want this. His eyes searched hers, and for a moment, just one, she saw something flicker in them. Hurt, quickly buried, replaced by gentleness, because of the contract, because of everything. She whispered, because this ends in a year, and I can't afford to. Her voice broke. She hated that she couldn't steady it, hated that he saw her unraveling. But instead of pushing, instead of pressing, Harlan exhaled slowly and stepped back, not far, but enough. Enough to give her space. Enough to show that he wouldn't chase her into a corner she wasn't ready to step out of. Okay, he said quietly. And that single word soft, patient, respectful hurt more than anger would have. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing once, like a man containing too many emotions at once. But just so we're clear. He turned back to her. Those blue eyes, steady and earnest, pinned her in place. I like you. Her breath caught. I'm not supposed to, he added with a humorless laugh. Trust me, I've tried not to. It would make everything easier. But I do. Her throat tightened so painfully it was almost unbearable. You don't, she whispered. You like the idea of protecting me. That's all. No, he said simply. It's you. She shook her head, unable to process the warmth spreading through her chest. This will ruin everything, she warned. Good, he murmured. Because everything was wrong before you showed up. That was too much. Too honest, too close to everything she wanted and everything she wasn't allowed to hope for. She took another step back, hands trembling in the sleeves of his jacket. I need to think. The pain that crossed his expression was quick, almost invisible, but she saw it. Take your time, he said, voice quiet again. He started to turn away, but paused, his back still half to her. But don't worry about the deal ending in a year. Her heart stopped. Why, slowly. He glanced over his shoulder, eyes burning softly beneath the dim hallway light. Because I don't plan on letting you go. A shiver ran down her spine. Desire. Fear. Something heartbreakingly close to hope. And neither of them knew, standing there, in the dim, haunted glow of her father's old house, how quickly the fragile new truth between them would be tested. Because the next day, the lie Harlan had built would start to crack, and the people who wanted to destroy Abigail were far from finished. Morning sunlight spilled over the skyline of downtown Austin, glinting off the mirrored glass of Whitmore Capitol, like the city itself was bowing to its new ruler. Abigail didn't belong here. She felt it in every polished tile, every echoing footstep in the vast marble lobby, every curious glance thrown her way as she walked beside Harlan. He'd asked her to come with him quietly, almost hesitantly the night before. No explanation. Just, I want you with me tomorrow. And though her heart had hammered with confusion and something dangerously close to anticipation, she'd said yes. Now she was regretting it. Not because she didn't want to support him, but because being here by his side felt too real, too intimate, too close to a line she wasn't ready to cross. He hadn't touched her yet today, hadn't said anything suggestive or teasing. But his presence was enough to pull her awareness tight. The tension between them had shifted since last night's confession. A new gravity tugged at her, and she didn't know how to fight it. She wasn't even sure she wanted to. As they stepped into the executive floor, whispers exploded like sparks. Employees stopped mid-stride, eyes widening, phones slipping from fingers. Abigail felt heat crawl up her neck. Why is everyone staring? She whispered. Harlan only placed a steadying hand on the small of her back, gentle, grounding. Because they're curious, he murmured without looking at her. About what? About everything. He didn't elaborate. He just kept walking. Confident, tall, quiet storm energy simmering beneath the surface. Then the glass doors to the boardroom slid open and the world shifted. A reporter's voice boomed from a live broadcast on the television mounted on the far wall. Breaking news, Whitmore Capital announces their new CEO, Harlan Whitmore, grandson of founder Benson Whitmore. Abigail froze. Her lungs tightened. Her pulse thudded painfully in her ears. Harlan Whitmore. She turned slowly to look at him. He didn't look back, didn't flinch, didn't deny it. He stepped forward into the light, like a man finally surrendering to his fate. The entire floor went silent. Even the air seemed to pause. Abigail felt the ground tilt under her feet. The man she'd married, the man she'd fought with, argued with, almost kissed, almost trusted, wasn't poor, wasn't a model, wasn't struggling, wasn't simple, wasn't anywhere close to what she thought. He was a billionaire. The billionaire. Her knees wobbled. She gripped the edge of a chair to steady herself, trying to make sense of the impossible truth. Everything he said, everything he did the Portia, the way he protected her, his confidence, the shadows behind his eyes, it all made sense now. And the realization hurt. It hurt more than she expected. Because she had told him her truths raw, vulnerable, unfiltered, and he had given her a facade. Her stomach twisted painfully. She didn't notice the elevator ding until she heard two familiar voices, familiar in the worst way. Chloe strutted out first, heels clicking loudly, Kyle trailing behind her with the smugness of a man who thought he'd finally won. We knew it. Chloe practically sang, waving photos in the air. We knew you were a lying little cheat. Abigail stiffened, dread creeping cold across her skin. Cheat, someone in the crowd echoed. Kyle held up his phone, flashing a picture to anyone who would look Abigail stepping into a luxury car the day before. Caught red-handed, Chloe snapped triumphantly. She's sleeping with the new CEO. The crowd reacted instantly, gasps, murmurs, judgments, the kind of harsh, cutting whispers that burrow under skin. Abigail felt all the blood drain from her face, her throat constricted, her breaths turning shallow. She opened her mouth to speak, to explain, to defend herself. But her voice wouldn't come. Chloe smirked. See? She can't even deny it. Kyle added. Poor Henry. His wife's been playing him like a damn fool. Abigail's chest squeezed painfully. The irony hit like a blade. Henry doesn't exist. Not the way you think. But she couldn't say that. Not without exposing the entire mess. Not without exposing him. Suddenly the boardroom doors swung open with a heavy, commanding thud. Everyone turned. The new CEO stepped out Harlan, but not the Harlan she knew in dimly lit hallways or quiet kitchen mornings. This was a man carved from power, black suit perfectly tailored, jaw set, eyes cold and blue like ice sharpened into weapons. The floor seemed to bow beneath him. Kyle paled instantly. Chloe's smirk faltered, and Abigail felt her heart stutter violently, not in fear, but in something deeper, something that made it hard to breathe. Harlan didn't look at anyone except the two people standing smugly with their false evidence. He walked toward them with a slow, deliberate calm that sent tremors of dread rippling outward. You're accusing her of cheating? He asked. Voice quiet enough to unsettle the room. Chloe lifted her chin defiantly. We have photographic proof. She's been getting into your car. With you. Obviously. Harlan studied her for one long, taut moment. Then his eyes slid to Kyle, and the expression he wore was nothing short of lethal. "So let me get this straight," he said, tone deceptively soft. "You're telling me," he paused, letting the tension coil around every word, "that my wife is cheating on me with me." The silence that followed was absolute. No breath, no whisper, no heartbeat. Just the crushing weight of humiliation settling over Chloe and Kyle as the room processed his words. Abigail felt her breath catch, a shock of warmth spreading through her chest. "My wife." The phrase hit differently now, fiercer, truer. "Claimed." Kyle stuttered, face flushing crimson. Wife." Chloe shook her head rapidly. That can't be right. She married some broke man you mistook me for." Harlan finished calmly. "Your mistake, not hers." He took another step forward, towering over them. "And let me make this absolutely clear. Abigail Johnson Whitmore is my legal wife. Attempting to slander her is attempting to slander me." His voice dropped to a low, dangerous register. "And I don't take kindly to anyone insulting what's mine." A collective gasp rippled through the floor. Abigail's pulse thundered. The word "mine" sliced through her thoughts and left a trail of wildfire behind. Before she could react, Harlan turned, closing the distance between them in an instant. His hand slid around her waist, firm, steady, pulling her gently but undeniably to his side. Her breath hitched at the contact. Her body betrayed her, leaning instinctively into his warmth, and the entire company watched, stunned, as the new CEO held his wife like she was the most important thing in the room. He spoke without looking away from her. "This woman," he said, voice firm, resonant, carrying across the marble floor like a vow, "is under my protection. Anyone who spreads lies about her will answer to me." Abigail swallowed hard. Heat surged up her neck. But it wasn't embarrassment. It was something else. Something terrifying. Something devastatingly tender, because he wasn't acting. Not now. Not in that moment. The truth sat between them, fragile, pulsing, undeniable. Kyle muttered something unintelligible. Chloe stepped back, face twisting. But Harlan didn't spare them another glance. His hand on Abigail's waist tightened ever so slightly. She dared to look up at him into those fierce, brilliant blue eyes, and what she saw there stole her breath. Regret, fear, want. 1,000 words he could never say here. 1,000 truths he owed her. And beneath it all, the raw, searing emotion he'd admitted only to her, "I like you." But this moment, this revelation changed everything. Because now the world knew who he was. And soon the world would know who she was. And the lie that had protected them both was crumbling fast, about to expose not just his identity, but their feelings. Feelings that neither of them were ready for. Feelings that could break them, or bind them, if the storm coming next didn't destroy them first. The revelation of Harlan's identity should have been the beginning of something new, something clearer, something hopeful. But the moment the boardroom doors closed and the murmur of astonished employees faded behind them, reality rushed in like a cold winter draft. Abigail could still feel the echo of his hand on her waist, still hear the words "my wife" ringing in her ears. But she could also sense something else, something tremoring beneath his calm exterior, something he wasn't saying. The car ride back to the estate was too quiet. Harlan didn't touch her, didn't tease, didn't try to close the distance. He drove with his jaw tight, eyes fixed forward, the tendons in his hands stretching white around the steering wheel. Abigail kept stealing glances, trying to understand the shift. He had stood up for her in front of an entire corporation. He had claimed her publicly, boldly, recklessly, but now he was silent, as if he were bracing for impact. "Harlan," she said softly. He didn't answer, only inhaled once, slowly, painfully before exhaling like it hurt. Her heart tightened. Something was wrong. She could feel it in the way he didn't look at her, in the way the warmth he always held around her had dimmed into a quiet ache. It wasn't until they reached the house that the storm finally broke. He stepped inside, dropping his keys onto the table with a heavy metallic clatter, then braced both hands against the counter as if holding himself up. Abigail approached slowly, fear nibbling at the edges of her breath. "Tell me what's going on." He didn't turn. "My grandfather came to the office today." Her stomach dropped. She'd never met Benson Whitmore, but his reputation was a legend, brilliant, sharper than most, ruthless when necessary. A man who'd built an empire from dust and would burn entire cities before letting it crumble. "What did he say?" Abigail asked, voice barely above a whisper. Harlan's shoulders rose and fell with a controlled breath. "He told me there's only one way to stabilize the company during the transition." The pause stretched long enough for her pulse to pound in her temples. "He wants me to marry Rebecca Davis." The name hit her like a blunt force. Abigail swayed slightly. She clutched the edge of a chair to keep herself upright. Rebecca, beautiful, privileged. From the powerful Davis family, the very people Chloe had mentioned. A perfectly arranged marriage. A business merger dressed in wedding vows. "And what did you tell him?" she asked, even though the answer was already unraveling inside her. Harlan finally turned to her, and the moment she saw his eyes, red-rimmed with exhaustion, soft with something heartbreakingly tender, her chest cracked. "I told him no," he said. "I told him I already have a wife." The words should have meant everything. They did. But the look on his face told her it wasn't enough. It didn't matter. He continued hoarsely. "He said the company needs the Davis alliance, that our investors expect it, that the board will demand it, that I don't get to choose." Abigail shook her head, feeling anger flare unexpectedly. "He can't force you." "He can," Harlan whispered. "He always has." A quiet, devastating truth. He took a breath, voice breaking at the edges. "I thought stepping into the CEO role would give me freedom, but I've never been further from it." Abigail's throat tightened. She didn't know whether to reach for him or run from the pain tightening around them. "So what happens now?" she asked, though the ground was already collapsing under her feet. His chest shuddered. "I don't want to lose you." She felt the words like fire against her skin. "Harlan." "I'm trying," he said, voice shaking. "I swear I'm trying to fight him, but I don't know how long I can hold him off." She swallowed hard. "What does he want you to do?" The answer came quietly, mercilessly. "Divorce you." Abigail felt the world blur around the edges. A coldness spread through her chest, slow, numbing, terrifying. She forced the words out. "Are you going to?" Harlan flinched as if she had struck him. "I don't want to." But the company, I don't care about the company. The desperation in his voice pulled her breath away. I care about you. For a moment, just a moment, she let herself believe it. Let herself feel the warmth of those words. Let herself imagine a world where he could choose her. But reality was unforgiving. Harlan. She moved toward him slowly, placing her hand on his arm. It trembled under her touch. Your entire life is tied to Whitmore Capital. Your future, your legacy, everything you've worked for. It means nothing without you, he whispered. She squeezed her eyes shut, fighting the sting. Don't say that. Why not? Because we weren't supposed to. Her voice cracked. We weren't supposed to feel this way. Silence. Thick. Heavy. Wounding. He reached up as if to touch her cheek, but his hand froze mid-air, caught in the gravity of the moment, then fell helplessly to his side. I'm taking you to see the meteor shower tonight, he said suddenly, his tone stiff with resolve. One last time before the world forced them apart. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The words hung unspoken like shards of glass, suspended in air. That night, under a sky inked with stars and streaked with silver trails, their silence was soft, not cold. Abigail stood wrapped in Harlan's coat, watching a meteor slice across the horizon, its light fading too quickly, like something precious slipping away before she could hold on to it. Thank you, she whispered, for this. Harlan stood beside her, hands shoved into his pockets as if restraining himself from reaching for her. I wanted our last night to be beautiful. Her breath hitched. She didn't ask him what he meant by last. She already knew. When they returned home, she lingered near the bedroom door, heart pounding with unspoken words. She wanted to tell him to stay, to fight harder, to choose her. But she wasn't selfish. She couldn't ask him to burn down his entire future for someone he'd known only a handful of weeks. Even if she was falling for him, even if the thought of losing him felt like being hollowed from the inside. Good night, Abigail, he murmured, voice tight. Good night, she whispered. It was the last thing they said to each other before everything shattered. The next morning, his side of the sofa was empty. His jacket was gone. His car, too. The silence in the house felt colder than any winter. On the kitchen counter lay a single folded note, her name written in his familiar, careful handwriting. Her hands shook as she opened it. I'm sorry. I can't keep this marriage. I promise I'll make it up to you. I hope you find happiness. Real happiness. Harlan, her vision blurred. She didn't cry. Not outwardly. Not where anyone could see. She folded the letter, placed it in a drawer, and stood perfectly still until the ache in her chest dulled to something manageable. Then she straightened her shoulders, exhaled once, and walked forward. Not because she was okay, but because she had no other choice. She wouldn't break where Chloe could see it. She wouldn't collapse where the world expected her to. She held her head high, even as her heart felt like it was bleeding quietly inside her. Abigail Johnson Whitmore moved on with dignity, without a single tear escaping. But the absence of tears didn't mean she wasn't drowning. Abigail didn't expect to see him again so soon. She had rehearsed everything, how she would keep her voice steady, How she would look him in the eye without flinching. How she would act as if the letter he left hadn't carved a hollow into her chest. But none of her mental armor mattered when the elevator doors slid open on the 48th floor of Whitmore Capital, and she found him standing there tall, sharp-suited, heartbreakingly composed on the outside, while something fractured flickered beneath the surface. Harlan stopped mid-step. The world seemed to pause with him. For a second, neither moved, neither breathed. Then his voice dropped, low and quiet. The kind of quiet that meant he was barely holding himself together. You really want the divorce? His gaze swept over her, her tired eyes, her set jaw, the faint redness she'd tried to hide with makeup. She hated that he noticed. She hated even more that she wanted him to. Abigail nodded once, small and tight. Yes. The word left her mouth cleanly, but inside, it tore threads she'd stitched together all week. We were never supposed to be anything real, she added, forcing calm. It was always just a contract. Something snapped in his expression, not anger, not surprise, but pain, but hollow, vulnerable, razor-sharp pain. Before she could step back, he closed the distance between them, fingers catching her wrist with a gentleness that contrasted the desperation vibrating through him. No, he murmured, voice hoarse. For me. It hasn't been fake for a long time. She tried to pull her hand away, but his grip tightened, not possessive, just pleading. Abigail, look at me. She did. Against her will, against her better judgment. His blue eyes were stormy, restless, far too earnest. I know I handled everything wrong, he said. I know leaving like that was the worst thing I could have done. I know I hurt you. Her throat tightened. She wanted to tell him. He had no idea. Instead, she forced her voice steady. It doesn't matter anymore. It matters to me. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the faint heat radiating off him. It hasn't mattered to anyone in my life before you. She shook her head. Don't do this. I have to, he whispered. And then, before she could stop him, he tugged her forward gently, guiding her hand to his chest. The thud of his heartbeat against her palm was fast, uneven, nothing like the composed CEO he showed the world. This is what you do to me, he said, voice low. You think I can just walk away from that? Abigail felt everything inside her, twist grief, anger, longing, all tangled so tightly she couldn't separate one from another. I can't forgive you for lying, she breathed. Not yet. I'm not asking for forgiveness. He took a shaky breath. I'm asking for one more day. She blinked. A day one. He repeated. Give me today. Come with me. No expectations. No promises. Just let me be with you. Why, she whispered. What difference can a day make? Harlan leaned in just enough for his forehead to almost touch hers, just enough for his breath to brush her skin. Because if you walk out now, I'll lose my chance to show you what's real. Her chest constricted. She should say no. She knew she should. But the raw emotion in his voice weakened her resolve. And the truth she hated admitting, even in the privacy of her own mind, was that she missed him. Terribly. Painfully. Completely. She exhaled slowly. One day, she said, that's all. Relief washed over his face so intensely she had to look away before her knees gave out. "I'll take it," he murmured. "Any second you give me, I'll take." They drove in silence, leaving the city behind, winding deep into the wooded hills west of Austin, where the air smelled like cedar and open sky. The trail he chose wasn't easy, steep in places, rocky in others, but Abigail didn't complain. Maybe because the physical effort kept her from thinking too much, or maybe because she felt strangely safe with him, even now, when everything was shattered between them. Halfway up the ridge, the wind picked up, cool and fragrant with the scent of wild grass. Abigail stopped to catch her breath, pushing curls from her forehead. Harlan stood beside her, but he kept his distance this time, hands in his pockets, gaze fixed on the horizon. She studied him quietly. He looked different without the weight of the company pressing on him. Younger, somehow. More human. More breakable. "Why here?" she asked softly. He didn't look at her. "This is where I used to hide when I was a kid," he said, "when things got overwhelming." Something in his tone made her chest ache. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "Yeah," he said, finally turning his gaze to her. "It is." The way he looked at her like she was the most breathtaking thing in the world made her heart stumble painfully. She tore her gaze away, pretending to admire the view. But he stepped closer, leaving only a sliver of space between them. "Abby," he said quietly. She froze. He rarely called her that. When he did, it slipped out like a secret. What she whispered without turning, "I can't forget you." The confession drifted through the wind like a fragile truth carried too far from home. She squeezed her eyes shut. "Harlan, I've tried," he said, the words trembling. "Every day since I left. I tried burying myself in work. I tried avoiding every room, every street, every sound that reminded me of you. But it's impossible." Abigail turned finally, meeting eyes that were no longer guarded or cold. They were wrecked. "I'm not asking you to take me back," he said. "I'm asking you to let me prove I'm worth finding again." Her breath hitched. The honesty was too much, too raw, too real. "I don't trust you," she whispered. "Not anymore, I know. And I'm angry. You should be. And I'm scared," she admitted, voice cracking. "So am I." The honesty disarmed her completely. She stepped back instinctively, needing space to breathe. "You left," she whispered. "You made that choice. I regret it every second. Regret doesn't change anything." "No," he agreed softly, "but effort might." She looked at him for a long, agonizing moment, torn between the part of her that craved him and the part that wanted to protect what little remained of her heart. Then she inhaled deeply, steadying herself. "Fine," she murmured. "1 year. We finish the contract like we originally planned. No more running, no more disappearing. And when the year ends," she swallowed hard, "if you still want me, you'll have to prove it." A slow, stunned smile tugged at his lips, a smile filled with relief, disbelief, and something overwhelmingly tender. "Sweetheart," he breathed, voice warm and electric. "I'm not letting you go." She rolled her eyes as heat rose to her cheeks. "Don't get ahead of yourself." "Too late," he murmured. "I already fell." Her heart stuttered violently. She turned away quickly, pretending to admire the trees. But her lips betrayed her with the slightest tremble. Behind her, she heard him exhale a soft, grateful sound, as if the weight choking him for days had finally lifted. But neither of them realized the truth hiding beneath the fragile peace they'd built on the ridge. Chloe and Kyle weren't done. And the Davis family certainly wasn't either. This reprieve, this single, borrowed day of honesty, was only the quiet before another storm. A storm that would either pull them closer or tear them apart for good. The fragile peace that Abigail and Harlan rediscovered on the hiking trail didn't last long. It shattered 2 days later. The moment Abigail stepped into Whitmore Capital and felt the air crackle with tension so thick it seemed to cling to her skin. People whispered in clusters. Phones buzzed with frantic messages. Eyes darted toward her and then quickly away, as if afraid to be caught looking. She felt the weight of every glance, like small, calculated stabs. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, and she didn't need to wait long before she learned what. Harlan found her before she even reached her desk. His face was unreadable, carved in stillness, like he was holding back a tidal wave. "Come with me," he said quietly. No explanation. No time to brace. She followed him to his office. The glass walls dimmed for privacy, tension crackling like electricity between them. Once the door closed, he turned, and the storm in his eyes made her chest tighten. "Someone leaked internal documents," he said, voice low and controlled. "Financial projections, merger notes, confidential memos, sensitive things." Abigail's stomach dropped. "That's terrible." "But why are you telling me?" Harlan exhaled through his nose, jaw clenching so hard the muscle twitched. "Because Kyle and Chloe told the board you did it." For a moment she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't form words. What she whispered. "They're saying," he continued, "that you leaked everything out of revenge because you were angry about us, about the divorce, about the company." Her pulse pounded. "That's not true." Her voice trembled, but her conviction did not. She stepped closer, eyes burning with indignation. "I would never." Harlan closed the distance between them in 2 strides and caught her hands in his. "I know." He said it so firmly, so without hesitation, that her breath froze in her lungs. "I know you didn't do it, Abigail." The sincerity of it made something fragile crack open inside her. It had been so long since anyone believed her without question. So long since someone chose her side on instinct rather than evidence. "But the board needs a culprit," he continued, his tone growing heavier. "And my grandfather is furious. He wants to make an example out of someone." Her heart clenched. "You mean me?" "No." Harlan tightened his hold on her, subtle but protective. "Not while I'm alive." His voice was sharp enough to cut stone, and yet beneath the steel was fear raw, shaking, impossible to hide. He wasn't afraid of losing his company. He was afraid of losing her, just as they'd found their way back. just as she'd given him a year to prove himself, just as something delicate was beginning to heal. They couldn't avoid the storm, not when the board demanded an emergency meeting. They walked in together, the cold fluorescent lights making everyone look paler, more nervous, more predatory. Abigail sat beside Harlan, back straight, despite the tremor running down her spine. Benson Whitmore, imposing even in age, slammed a stack of papers on the table. Confidential information was leaked. The stock dropped this morning. Someone must be held accountable. His gaze sliced toward Abigail with practiced disdain. Harlan's jaw tightened. She didn't do this. You don't know that. Benson retorted. She has motive. She's an outsider. She's unstable. Harlan surged to his feet. Don't you dare talk about her like that. The room froze. Benson's eyes narrowed. Sit down, boy. No. Harlan's voice carried the weight of a man reclaiming his life. This ends now. We are not scapegoating Abigail for problems she didn't create. Benson slammed his cane once, hard. You're blinded by her. And you, Harlan shot back, are blinded by your need for control. Abigail watched, breath shallow. She'd never seen Harlan like this beyond anger, beyond defiance. This was devotion. This was loyalty. This was love. Maybe. Even if neither of them had dared say the word. Before the confrontation could escalate, the head of cybersecurity rushed into the room. We found something, he said breathlessly. The breach, it didn't come from Abigail's account. Silence swallowed the room. Benson glared. Then from where the man swallowed, from a device registered under. Chloe Davis. It felt like the air shifted. Abigail's pulse skipped. Chloe Davis. Not Chloe Johnson. Davis. Suddenly, the pieces clicked. Rebecca Davis. The arranged marriage contract. The partnership negotiation. The Davis family had motive to destabilize the company. Kyle had motive to sabotage Abigail. Together, they had the perfect storm. Harlan's eyes flashed with lethal realization. Bring them in. Minutes later, Chloe and Kyle were dragged into the boardroom, faces pale, each stumbling over excuses that held less weight than paper in a storm. Files were displayed, IP addresses traced, messages recovered. Kyle's phone and Chloe's tablet were full of evidence screenshots, drafts, instructions, everything. You tried to frame Abigail, Harlan said, voice dangerously calm. Chloe's face twisted. She deserved it. You leaked documents. Benson roared. Do you have any idea what you've done? I did it for us, Kyle cried, grabbing Chloe's arm. For our future. No, Abigail said quietly, her voice steady despite her heart racing. You did it for greed. Chloe glared at her. Venomous, huh? You think you're better than us? Abigail lifted her chin. No, I just don't destroy people to get what I want. And for the first time, Chloe didn't have a single word to throw back. Security escorted them out, Kyle screaming, Chloe sobbing and furious. The board murmured in shock. Benson rubbed his forehead as if decades of arrogance had finally caught up to him. In the quiet that followed, Harlan reached for Abigail's hand, not subtly, not cautiously, but openly, claiming her, standing with her. The entire boardroom watched as he pulled her gently to her feet. "Before we end this meeting," Harlan said, voice steady and commanding, "there's one more decision to announce." He looked down at her with a soft intensity that made her breath catch. "Abigail Johnson. Whitmore will step into the role of general manager for the Austin division." The room erupted gasps, outrage, disbelief, arguments. Benson slammed his cane again. "Absolutely not. She's inexperienced." "She's brilliant," Harlan countered. "She's steady under pressure. She understands the human side of this company better than any of us." His thumb grazed the back of her hand, grounding her. And today, she proved more integrity than half the people in this room. Abigail swallowed hard, her heart battering her ribcage. She doesn't need a title handed to her. Benson spat. She needs to earn it. She already has. Harlan looked at her again, and in that moment, the noisy boardroom faded. All she saw was him. All he saw was her. "She's the woman I trust most," he finished quietly. "The one who stood strong when the world tried to break her." He lifted their joined hands ever so slightly. "And she deserves everything." Abigail inhaled sharply, her spine straightening, strength blooming from a place she'd kept buried for too long. She faced the board not timidly, not apologetically, but with the calm assurance of a woman who had fought too many battles to back down now. "You won't regret this," she said, her voice even, steady, powerful. "I won't let you." Harlan's eyes softened with pride. Benson stared at her for a long, thoughtful moment, and something in his expression cracked the faintest acknowledgement of respect. Or maybe inevitability. When the meeting adjourned, employees had already gathered in the lobby, buzzing with rumors. Cameras flashed, people whispered, and Harlan didn't hesitate, didn't hide, didn't care. He slid his hand around her waist, pulled her close with a confidence that sent a flush through her chest, and spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "This is my wife, and she deserves to be here." Abigail lifted her gaze, strong, steady, rooted in her truth. She'd survived betrayal, grief, humiliation, yet she stood tall, poised, radiant, a black woman who refused to break. A woman who'd been underestimated her entire life. Not anymore. She met the crowd with a calm, unshakable fire in her eyes. And for the first time, she didn't feel like she was standing in Harlan's shadow. She felt like she was standing beside him, equal, powerful, chosen. What she didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that their enemies weren't finished. And the Davis family did not lose gracefully. The world had never felt as fragile as it did in the moment Harlan burst into the abandoned warehouse and saw Abigail tied to a chair. Her face bruised, her breath shallow. Chloe pacing frantically nearby like a cornered animal. The memory clung to him like smoke even days later, the echo of Abigail's muffled cries, the cut of rope against her wrists, the sickening crack of Kyle's boot as he shoved her to the floor, before Harlan took him down with a violence he didn't know he was capable of. The police arrived too late to stop the chaos, but early enough to see Harlan kneeling beside Abigail, trembling as he held her head gently between his palms, whispering her name over and over, terrified she wouldn't open her eyes. She did. Barely. But she did. And he had held her so tightly afterward that she could feel every tremor running through him. He didn't let go, even long after she'd been checked by paramedics and cleared to go home. He didn't let go because the fear in him had carved a wound so deep it hadn't stopped bleeding. Now, days later, though her bruises had faded to soft colors and her strength was returning, the fear in his eyes hadn't left. Abigail felt it each time he touched her, as if he expected her to disappear if he looked away. They stood outside the hospital at sunset, the Texas sky stained gold and rose, warm wind brushing through her curls. Abigail leaned carefully into his chest, her body still fragile, but alive. Alive, because he'd come for her, because he'd torn down the world to reach her. His arms wrapped around her with a gentleness that contradicted the fury he'd unleashed on Kyle and Chloe. "I almost lost you," he whispered into her hair, voice trembling despite how tightly he held her. "Abby, I nearly lost you forever." She tightened her fingers against the back of his shirt, grounding him, grounding herself, feeling the way his breath shuddered as though each inhale was an apology. "You didn't," she murmured. "I'm right here." His embrace grew firmer, his voice breaking. "I'm never letting anyone hurt you again. Not while I exist." She didn't answer, but he felt the way she clung to him, soft, desperate, alive. And something inside him shifted, clicked, settled into unshakable certainty. He couldn't wait anymore. He wouldn't waste another second pretending fate hadn't handed him everything he never knew he wanted. That evening, Harlan drove her out to the ranch house where they'd first stayed together, a place full of quiet mornings, hesitant glances, laughter they hadn't realized was love. The sun had fully dipped now, replaced by the velvet spread of night. Abigail frowned softly. "Why are we here?" "You'll see," he murmured, voice warm but shaky with something like anticipation. He led her around the back field, the wind whispering through tall grass. And then she saw it. Dozens of lanterns hung from old oak branches, their golden light flickering like captured stars. White flowers spilled along a path, gardenias, lilies, jasmine, glowing softly under strings of fairy lights that wound around the trees like constellations. The whole world felt like it had melted away, leaving only this field, this light, this man, this moment, Harlan. Abigail breathed, her voice barely holding together. He wasn't looking at the lights. He was looking at her. He took both her hands gently, lifting them as if they were something delicate and sacred. "I almost lost you," he said again, softer this time. And in those seconds, everything became painfully clear. Her heart thudded. What became clear? He sank to one knee, slowly, reverently, like bowing to something holy. Abigail froze, breath trapped behind her ribs as he looked up at her with those impossibly blue eyes, eyes filled with a love so unguarded she couldn't breathe. "Abigail Johnson," he said, voice thick with emotion. "Do you want to be my wife without contracts, without pretending, without conditions?" Her throat tightened, her eyes burned. She had dreamed of being chosen, wanted, loved, not because she was convenient, not because she was necessary, but because she mattered, because someone saw her, truly saw her. And here he was, the man who'd lied, lost her, found her, fought for her, the man who'd risked everything to protect her, the man kneeling in a field of golden light. offering her a future she never dared imagine. Tears spilled down her cheeks, not from pain, but from something overwhelming and breathtaking. She let out a shaky, disbelieving laugh. "Only if you promise to behave yourself." His smile at her joke was the softest thing she'd ever seen, boyish and relieved and overflowing with adoration. He rose slowly, guiding her into his arms. "I'll behave," he whispered, pressing his forehead against hers. "I'll be gentle. I'll be patient. I'll be everything you want." His hands cupped her waist tenderly. "But I'll also love you in ways you can't imagine." Her breath hitched. "Oh, really, sweetheart?" he murmured with a low, warm laugh. "I will spoil you, protect you, worship you whatever you want, whatever you need. Just stay with me." Her tears fell freely then. She brushed her thumb along his jaw, feeling the tremor there. "Yes." His breath caught. "I said yes," she whispered. And with those words, something fierce and bright snapped loose inside him. Joy, relief, desire, devotion, all tangled and overflowing. He kissed her, not carefully, not hesitantly, but deeply, passionately, with the certainty of a man who had almost lost everything and refused to waste another heartbeat. She kissed him back with the same intensity, with gratitude, with love, with the fire of a woman who had finally found a home. Behind them, fireworks burst into the night gold, white, silver painting the sky like a celebration written by the universe itself. Their silhouettes glowed under the cascade of light as they kissed, long and slow and hungry, an unspoken promise, forged in heat and devotion, and 1,000 unsaid feelings, finally allowed to breathe. The world around them blurred into streaks of gold and shadow. All noise disappeared. All fear vanished. There were only two people in existence now, Abigail and Harlan, holding on to each other like they were the beginning and end of everything. He pulled back just enough to rest his forehead against hers. "You're my wife," he whispered. "Truly. Finally. Completely." She laughed through her tears. "And you're my billionaire menace." He grinned against her lips. "I'll take that." She framed his face with her hands, her voice trembling with joy. "I love you." His breath hitched again, astonishment, awe, relief crashing through him. "Sweetheart." His voice broke. "I love you more than my next breath." He kissed her again, pouring every piece of himself into her, his fear, his hope, his devotion, his future, and under the Texas night, wrapped in flowers, lantern light, and each other, they finally stepped into the life they were meant to share. No contracts, no lies, no conditions, just love raw, real, lasting. And from that night on, they were happy, truly happy. Not because fate had been kind, but because they chose each other again, and again, and again. The wedding reception blurred into a haze of champagne bubbles, swirling lights, and the warm, dizzy sense that the entire world had shrunk to the shape of two people, Abigail and Harlan, orbiting each other across the ballroom as if gravitation itself were conspiring to keep them close. They had danced, laughed, toasted, kissed under an archway of white roses while guests cheered. But none of it stayed clear in Abigail's memory. All she remembered with perfect clarity was the way his hand never fully left her back, the way he kept glancing at her like he couldn't quite believe she was real, the way her heart beat too fast each time he leaned close. So when the elevator doors slid open at the top floor of the Whitmore penthouse, and the two of them stepped inside the cavernous space lined with floor-to-ceiling windows and golden city lights, the real evening, their evening finally began. The moment the door clicked shut behind them, Harlan reached out. One warm hand settled on her waist from behind, pulling her softly against the solid line of his chest. She could feel the heat of him through the delicate fabric of her gown, feel the steadiness of his breath, feel the shift in the air as if something electric had sparked alive. Mrs. Whitmore. His voice, low and roughened by emotion, wrapped around her like a vow. Tonight you're mine. She swallowed, her pulse jumping. Have I not been yours before? Harlan dipped his head, lips brushing the curve of her ear, a feather-soft touch that made her knees wobble dangerously. Not like this, he murmured. Not without limits, not without fear, not without pretending we had to hold back. She turned, lifting her gaze to meet his. His eyes burned with something beautiful: love, hunger, awe, gratitude. Everything she had ever hoped someone might someday feel for her. So tell me, she whispered, what happens now that we don't hold back? He answered her with a kiss, deep, unhurried, intense enough to melt thought, time, reason. His mouth claimed hers with a reverence that made her toes curl inside her satin heels. She felt the room tilt, felt her hands grip the lapels of his suit jacket just to stay upright. When he finally broke the kiss, she was breathless. Now, he said, voice brushing her lips like velvet. I get to show you exactly how long I've waited for this. His jacket hit the floor first. Hers slipped from her shoulders next. But nothing felt rushed. Everything unfolded with an intimate slowness that made her shiver warm skin beneath her fingertips. Soft golden light blooming across the penthouse as the dimmers came on. Notes of jazz floating through the air like silk. Abigail pressed a hand to his chest, feeling the strong, steady thrum of his heartbeat beneath her palm. Have you ever imagined this night? She asked, her voice barely steady. A soft laugh escaped him, quiet, deep, the kind of sound that made her want to lean in closer. Every night, he confessed. Every damn night. Her cheeks warmed, but before she could reply, he swept her effortlessly into his arms, carrying her across the room in a way that made her grip his shoulders with startled instinct. Harlan, sweetheart, he whispered, eyes glinting. Let me hold you. She did, and he did. He eased her down onto the bed as though she were something precious, settling beside her with a tenderness that twisted her heart into something molten and unrecognizable. He tucked a blanket around them, not because she was cold, but because he wanted them wrapped together in something soft, warm, safe. Abby, he said quietly, brushing her cheek with a thumb. If you ever say stop, I will. She slid her arms around his neck and pulled him close. Harlan, we're married. I'm not stopping anything. His answering smile was a mixture of relief and mischief. Good, he murmured, pressing a slow kiss to her jaw. Because I intend to spend all night proving one thing. And what's that? She whispered, breath catching. He leaned in, lips brushing hers. That you're never getting away from me again. The rest of the night unfolded in a tapestry of whispered words, quiet laughter, breathless warmth, touches that made her tremble, kisses that felt like promises. Nothing rushed, nothing forced, no contracts, no pretenses. Just two people finally allowed to love each other in the open completely. Honestly. Fiercely. And the world outside their penthouse faded entirely, leaving only the soft glow of city lights, the warmth of tangled limbs beneath the blanket, the sound of their names spoken in shaky, laughing breath. What happened between them belonged to them alone, no one else. And it was perfect. Morning sunlight poured through the tall windows of the Whitmore penthouse like liquid gold, spilling warmth over the plush rugs, sleek furniture, and the chaotic mess of toys scattered across the living room floor. Harlan Whitmore, CEO of a multi-billion-dollar empire, feared negotiator, polished, powerful, was currently kneeling on the carpet wearing pajama pants, an old t-shirt, and a look of pure exasperation, while two tiny humans waged war over a bottle of warm milk. Evan Whitmore, 8 months old. Curly brown hair and piercing blue eyes identical to his father's. Clutched the bottle with the grim determination of a seasoned businessman refusing to give up a merger. Ella Whitmore, 8 months old. Soft brown skin and round cheeks that looked exactly like Abigail's baby photos, made indignant little noises while trying to wrestle the bottle away with surprising strength. Guys, Harlan huffed, shifting Evan to one arm and leaning dangerously to catch Ella before she toppled off the blanket. There are 2 bottles. 2. You don't need to fight over one like it's a controlling stake in the company. Evan growled. Ella kicked him in the ribs. Great, he muttered under his breath. My children are tiny corporate sharks. Oh. Abigail's voice drifted from the kitchen doorway, warm, amused, teasing. She stepped into view wearing nothing but his oversized white button-down shirt and her hair in a sleepy bun, looking like the exact definition of home. Is the big, scary CEO struggling with his morning board meeting? He looked up at her, hair tousled, a bit of dried milk on his jaw, looking nothing like the powerful billionaire the world feared, and somehow even more devastatingly handsome for it. Sweetheart, he said dryly, running Whitmore Capital is easier than parenting these 2 gremlins. Evan squealed. Ella smacked his chest with a fistful of blanket. See? Harlan gestured helplessly at them. Shareholder sabotage. Mutiny. Attempted takeover. I'm losing control. Abigail burst out laughing, the warm, rich sound filling the room like sunlight. She walked over and sat beside him, leaning against his shoulder. You're doing great, she murmured, kissing his cheek. You're covered in milk, he corrected. That's parenthood, she said. Get used to it. Evan reached for her hair. Ella tried to climb into Harlan's lap. In a matter of seconds, the twins had fused themselves to their parents like adorable magnets. And Abigail melted into the chaos with a smile that made Harlan's heart tighten the way it always did when he looked at her. He leaned his forehead against hers, lowering his voice. Thank you, he whispered, for them, for this life, for choosing me. Her expression softened. You chose me first. Not true? He murmured, brushing a thumb along her cheek. You were the one thing I never saw coming, and the only thing I'll never stop choosing. She kissed him softly, slow, warm, filled with the quiet intimacy of two people who had survived storms together and built something beautiful afterward. Ella protested loudly at being ignored. Evan threw the empty bottle at Harlan's thigh with surprising accuracy. Abigail rolled her eyes. Your children demand attention. They're half yours too, he reminded her, scooping both twins onto his lap. And yet, she teased, they seem to cause trouble only when you're around. They're planning a coup, he whispered dramatically. I can sense it. She pushed his shoulder playfully. You're ridiculous. And you married me, he said smugly. Her smile softened into something tender. I'd marry you again. His eyes gleamed. Funny you mention that. She blinked. What do you mean? Harlan tilted his head slightly, lips curling in that familiar, dangerously charming smile. There's one contract we haven't completed yet. Oh, really? She asked. And what contract is that? He leaned closer, voice low, warm, wicked, second honeymoon night. She smacked his arm as her cheeks warmed. Harlan, what he said innocently. We already have 2 kids. Might as well try for 3. Evan and Ella made outraged baby noises, as if protesting the idea of additional siblings. Abigail's laughter filled the penthouse again as she wrapped her arms around her husband and their twins, pulling all 3 of them into her embrace. Sunlight bathed the family in gold. Evan giggled. Ella chewed on Harlan's shirt collar, and Abigail whispered against his cheek. The Whitmores. Perfect. He finished softly, kissing the top of her head, and they were messy, loud, joyful, chaotic, wealthy, but most importantly, deeply, deeply in love. A billionaire rom-com ending with exactly the kind of forever they had fought for.